Hey everyone, Aaron Philbeck here at Kai Association, and I am joined by Dan Bienvenue, who is a managing director at General Atlantic and currently sits on Kai Association's board of directors. So I'm excited to get into this conversation of a different perspective of working with LPs from a GP's perspective, as Dan has sat on both sides of the table. So, Dan, before I get into some questions for you, I'd love for you to just spend a bit of time introducing yourself and talking through your background.
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. I'm happy to, and thank you. Thank you for having me. As you say, I'm a managing director at General Atlantic in the Capital Solutions team. I've been here for a whopping 5 months, having joined just in May. And before that, I was at CalPERS, was the sort of the bulk of my career. So at CalPERS, I was the first deputy CIO. I was named deputy CIO in April of 2020. I was there for a total of 21 years, grew up through the public market side in public equity. But as you know, given some of the turnover they had, I actually sat in the CIO chair on two different occasions for a total of about 3 years. And then, as you say, I have the honor of being on the board at Kaya, which is a great privilege.
Wonderful. Well, Dan, there's a couple of things that you just said there that I want to pick up on, and maybe the first is that you've sat on that LP side of the table. You've done the due diligence on external managers, done that for such a long time, and now you've moved to the dark side. You've gone to the asset management GP side of the table, and I would just be curious, as someone who has now sat on both sides of that table, just some of the surprises or things that you've discovered now that you're interfacing with LPs in this new role. What is it like to be on that other side of the table?
Yeah, no, I mean, thanks for the question. It's a good one. I have heard the dark side. I don't know how many times since since I shared that I was going to make this career change. Um, it's really been great. I mean, I would say maybe not so much a surprise, but one thing, a couple of things I was relieved about. One is that when you're the my age, when you're 22 years old, you need a job, so an interview is very one-sided. When you're my age, the interview is really kind of a mutual interview. And I remember asking our CEO, Bill Ford, to describe sort of the culture that he was trying to build. And he said, high integrity, excellence in everything we do, teamwork and collaboration, hard work and grit. And I remember thinking, I love everything you said. I love that you led with integrity. But, joining a private equity, New York City based private equity firm, there was a part of me that was like, is it really that collaborative? And so I will say, like as I say, not a surprise, but maybe a relief to see that it's been really that way. I mean, and that's certainly the case at GA, but at other places, I mean, I think it's a lot of good people trying to do good stuff. Also, I would say a relief was in joining GA. Um, CalPERS was an early investor as on the pension side. It was one of the early pensions to be invested. And doing the underwriting, you think you got it right, but you never really know. So now being able to be internal and see how the sausage is made, it's actually a relief to see that it's even more robust than I thought. And of course, now as a personal investor, that's a relief also. For surprise, I would say probably the biggest surprise is just how much white space there is and how much opportunity for improvement and entrepreneurialism and all of that, which is just really, engaging and energizing. Um, but I think, you have a natural tendency when you're at an external organization to look at organizations and think, oh, that place has it perfected and that place has it perfected. And to be fair, every place I've joined, I've had this same realization where I've been like, oh, they don't have it perfected. I mean, and I would say that now being on the GP side, while it's a different side and it's, private sector and all the like, both at GA and at every GP I come in contact with, there are areas of white space and areas for improvement. And as I say, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. That to me is exciting and engaging. And there's, I think we are, as Bill wanted, we're excellent, but could we be more excellent? And is there opportunity to continue to bring value? Absolutely. And that's been, I guess, somewhat of a surprise, but also exciting.
And I would imagine, you go through this underwriting process, sitting outside of these organizations, and you're going through people and culture and process, all those things that are requirements in order for you to actually make a commitment to a manager. and then you join and you actually maybe a little bit further, see how the sausage is made and how the organization operates. So maybe in general terms, I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about what you might see in the underwriting process versus what you actually experience when you go and sit on that other side.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you alluded to all of them. You hear about a collaborative, bring expertise together culture, but you always, we've all been in situations and cultures where it doesn't work that way. And so you wonder how much of it is being, lip service versus sort of actual fact. Same thing with, the sort of robustness of the investment committee process. Like that's a perfect example of one. Our CEO sits on the investment committee, and I could envision a scenario where everybody just defers to the CEO. And I remember saying that to one of as I just joined the place, my new colleagues, and my colleague looking at me and saying, if you think that's the case, then you clearly don't know Martine. Martine is the chair, the chair of the investment committee. That like, if our CEO tells Martine X or Y, but Martine disagrees, Martine will absolutely disagree. Which, again, as an investor and as an underwriter, like, that's what you want. I mean, I have for a long time been a big believer in diversity. And for me, though, that speaks about, sure, there's a social aspect, which is positive, but that's not what I think should be the driver for an organization's unlock of diversity. A diverse group of people where those diverse perspectives can actually be included in the decision making will make better decisions, whether that is portfolio management decisions, business decisions, like you name it. And so it's really encouraging to see that actually happen, and see the banter, and see, you can see that someone really feels strongly and is trying to convince someone to do the other thing, and then the votes come up and that person still thumbs down. It's good. It's positive.
Yeah. So Dan, the other transition that I think is interesting that you've done here, aside from the LP to GP transition, is the public to private. So your background and where you grew up on the LP side is this public markets underwriting, and now you've made this transition over to private markets. So again, maybe a compare and contrast of the different types of strategies that are available. Maybe from a purely organizational perspective, what are some of the differences you've noticed between the public market managers and then the private market managers? And I realize you might have experienced it differently sitting on different sides, but maybe some general comments that you can make around public versus private.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. And you're right. And I think you've even heard me say that I'm, kind of a recovering public markets person, having grown up my career in the public market side. But yeah, I am a big fan of privates. I mean, I just think that the privates have some advantages that the public markets don't have, whether that's, the ability to use, sort of inside information to weigh in on your decisions, and the sort of the information unlock, structural opportunities, degrees of freedom, and how you sort of structure exposures. Definitely the fact that in the public markets, alpha is a zero sum game. In the private markets, if value is actually being created, which it should be, it's a positive sum game. So, and then compare that with some of the disadvantages of public markets, whether that's some of the short-termism that comes in with, quarterly reporting cycles and the like, whether that's, kind of some of the, on the private side, you can have much more, I think, strategic thinking. It's much tougher on the public side, throw in regulatory burden. So yeah, I'm a big fan of private markets. And of course, I mentioned having sat in the CIO chair twice at CalPERS, that those two times happened to coincide with a strategic asset allocation update, the first in 21, 22, and then the second one in sort of 23, 24. And you saw that, CalPERS exposure to privates go from 20% to 33% to 40%. So, and then of course I pivoted my career. So I fully acknowledge that I'm currently not objective, but having grown up on the public side, I think I came to my opinion objectively. For differences, I would say that, there's a couple of things. I mean, definitely on the West Coast, we used to joke that we didn't see the private market folks until about 9 a.m, whereas us, public market folks, we were in the office by about 6. But then conversely, around, 4 or 5 in the afternoon, the public markets people were all gone and the private market folks were all there until 6 or whatever. So I mean, there's definitely a sort of a time zone thing. The other, I would say, big one is that I think in the private markets, you see more entrepreneurialism. You see more, as I mentioned, degrees of freedom around structuring. I think, in my opinion, in investment management, there's always a blend of art and science. I would say that in the public market side, it's more of the science. And again, you raised this. I grew up more on the quant side, so very much structured, quantity, mathematical, much more science than art. And then I would say conversely, in my experience in the private market side, more fundamental and a good blend of art and science. And by the way, I actually think one of the biggest challenges sitting in a, sort of an allocator chair and sitting in the CIO chair when I was, is that, everybody would love to have the data, backward looking data, tell them what the future holds. And then it'd be a pretty easy job, but that's not the case. Right. And there is this constant blend of art and science. And, that is simultaneously the challenge, but also the enjoyment of it. So, but yeah, I would say probably more of the art on the private side.
Yeah, that's a really good framing. And as maybe a fellow quant lover and trying to explain returns in a more systematic fashion, I think I can see that difference of you have more data, you can explain returns a little bit better in the public markets, whereas the private markets, although I think it's shifting a little bit, it's still somewhat unexplainable, and there's obviously that operator mentality that you can't quantify to a large degree. So I think I like that framing quite a bit.
Even in the public side, though, I will say that a lot of times there's a science, but there's the art, but the art is a couple of layers down, right? You have assumptions in your mathematical model, and then those drive the science at the highest level, and it looks objective, but this stuff is super subjective. So I think there's definitely more of the science, but I also think there is still the underlying art, and that's, like as I say, that's the part that's fun.
Yeah, one of the ways that I used to frame it was on the public market side is it's not as much what you own, but how you own it, and maybe that's where the science and the art comes in, because the construction is a little bit different than the security selection, if you will. Maybe that's not the right way to look at it, but just my frame of reference. So Dan, one of the things that we've talked a lot about here at Kaya is this total portfolio approach. We just released a paper today as we're recording this on a follow-up piece around TPA and this whole transition that we're seeing with a lot of different asset owners. I know CalPERS has been very public about this journey over the past couple of years. And a lot of what we focused on from this report was on the LP and how do you go from an SAA type of framework to more of a TPA type of framework. But I think an interesting angle that we hit on a little bit in this piece, but I'd be curious from your perspective, again, having sat on both, is the GP, and how does the GP actually interact with an organization that's either along the journey of TPA or is further towards that TPA type of framework. So again, maybe a philosophical question for you, but how do you see the role of the GP in terms of partnership with those LPs that are blowing up the SAA model and trying to move to something a little bit more holistic?
No, it's a terrific question. And first, Aaron, let me say congratulations to you and the team. As a board member, I certainly can't take any credit for it, but I can take a little bit of pride in the fact that I think the team was very early to the TPA. I mean, I think all of the thought leadership that you and your team exhibit. I mean, the fact that this is a follow-up piece on TPA is a testament to sort of the thought leadership. So congratulations. So first of all, I'm a big fan of TPA, and when Stephen, the incoming CIO at CalPERS, he's now been there for over a year. But when Stephen got there, and he talked about this TPA approach, I told him that I'm completely supportive. Now, one thing that I will say is that, and you and I have talked about this, I don't see the ends of the continuum as being TPA and SAA. I actually see the ends of the continuum as being sort of TPA on one side, and then very siloed behavior, siloed portfolio management approaches optimization at the low level, and then it comes together however it comes together. Like that's the very suboptimal part. I actually think you can get a lot of benefits of TPA while still having an SAA. And I say that because in 2019, when Ben Meng was our CIO, Ben and I kicked off a strategic refresh for CalPERS. And, like our whole mantra was one team, one fund. So it was all about working as one holistic team and one fund, because it was the total fund that paid the benefits. But we were always planning on being under an SAA. And I thought that you could get a lot of benefits of a TPA while still having an SAA. Now, I actually think that to get all the way to a TPA approach, depending on the asset owner, is a terrific outcome, which is why I say I'm super supportive. And I think it's great thought leadership on the part of Kaya. But I guess I just don't want to completely denigrate SAA, because I actually think you can do a lot of good stuff with still an SAA and still a lot of this sort of one team TPA sort of unlock. Specific for a GP, I would say a few things. First and foremost, I think it forces the need to become a solutions provider, to really hear what the LP needs, whether that's things like knowledge transfer or resource help, whether it's things like, co-invest to get, money in the ground quickly, or average down fee schedules, whether it's capacity in certain types of exposure. I mean, I think really being a solutions provider is the first critical thing that when you're facing off with someone who's looking at it as a TPA, because of the fact that for a TPA, in an SAA, you have more buckets. And as long as you can meet a bucket, you're kind of like, okay, good, I can solve that. Whereas with a TPA, it's much more holistic, and therefore the conversation, I think, needs to be much more of a partnership and much more of a sort of solutions provider type approach. Secondly, I think really helpful for a GP is to broaden out the and think that, and again, it goes back to the sort of the buckets. If you have one product as a GP and you face off with an LP, if a TPA type LP is going to be, is again looking to solve their holistic problems, and they may or may not need something in that specific product set. And it's the old, adage that I used to use all the time. It's like, to a hammer, everything's a nail. And it gets, if you don't need a nail, as an LP, it's like, look, I need a solution. I don't need just the same thing thrown at me. Now, I will also say that it's just worth mentioning, because I take great pride in spending time as a mentor. It means that as people on the GP side, you really need to be conversant in a lot of things. And so something that I say to junior staff members is, you got to be able to go deep in the sort of the area of expertise that you have, but then you also got to be able to increase your breadth. So you got to get both breadth and depth, because as the world moves more towards TPA, which, by the way, I think we're in very early innings of this whole TPA rollout. And as LPs move more towards a TPA type approach, people, AI is going to be able to solve a lot of the specific stuff. People are going to have to be able to really broaden out their approach and then connect dots. And this again goes back to the solutions provider, which then I guess is the final thing, is that I think GPs need to get better at flexibility in their thinking. I can almost liken it to, SAA is like a Rubik's Cube where everything's kind of got a box. TPA is more like a bowl of soup where everything kind of mixes together. A lot of people think through the lens of Rubik's Cube. And in fact, even I, as a sort of a quant portfolio manager by background, have a tendency to have more of a Rubik's Cube brain. And you got to like really increase the flexibility to think through the lens of the bowl of soup. But I think that's, it's a challenge, but it's important for people to sort of think that way.
Yeah, that I think all that makes a ton of sense. Dan, I hadn't thought of a Rubik's Cube versus a bowl of soup, but I like that analogy. I might steal that from you. That's great.
Feel free. I steal enough of your TPA stuff, so feel free.
Absolutely. So maybe a final question for you, Dan, is there's all these different types of asset owners that are out there, and again, you've sat on the public pension side, so maybe a specific question for public pensions, but for GPs that are trying to work more with public pensions, there's got to be some unique characteristics or considerations that they need to think through when it comes to partnering with those different pools of capital. Could you just walk through what some of those might be and how that might differ from some different other asset owners that are out there?
Sure, happy to. I mean, I guess first of all, I think one of the key things, and this is really with any asset owner, is understand the problem that they're trying to solve. And you mentioned this in terms of the, different from asset owners. Every pool of capital is intended to do something. In the case of a pension, it's intended to pay pension benefits. In the case of a healthcare plan, it's intended to pay healthcare benefits. In the case of a family office, it's probably intended for, sort of generational wealth. I mean, like, you name whatever it is. So I think the first thing that is really helpful is to understand the problem that the LP is trying to solve. And certainly for myself, when I was sitting in, the various leadership roles at CalPERS over the years, one of the things that I often asked was, okay, if you were me and you had $500 billion, you needed to expose it to a set of risks to try to earn, a sort of sustainable returns with some resilience and downside protection to pay benefits over generations. Like, how would you think about that problem? And so I think that the more that a GP can sort of project themselves into that chair of the LP and think, how would I try to solve the problem that they're trying to solve? I think that's really valuable for a GP's sort of perspective and consideration. The second thing I would say is, and it's funny because I think we always say LP and GP, and a lot of times people forget the emphasis is on the L or the G, but I actually think we should put more emphasis on the P. That the P in both cases is partner, and I definitely think that it was really critical as being a good partner. And I'll say this, really going back to even before my time at CalPERS, in our industry, I think you can often categorize organizations and even maybe people, but definitely organizations into one of sort of two categories. They're the very transactional, commercial, and by the way, that's not wrong. Like, if they bring good value, that, like, they can actually be very additive to a portfolio. But then there are others that are just kind of approach it as a partner, and they know that I know that they're not a not-for-profit, and that over time, like, we're going to have to find a way to make the commercials work, but that as long as we take a long-term perspective, we'll make the commercials work. And I definitely am a believer that, especially as we move more towards TPA, but also really just the industry works better and it's more enjoyable if people focus more on that sort of partnership bit. And that's definitely one thing that in my new role, I've been very focused on, being that, like, I'm just going to be a good partner. I'm just going to try to bring a bunch of value, and I believe that the commercials will take care of themselves over time. I guess another thing that I would share that for GPs to keep in mind is that LPs a lot of times have pretty consistent set of priorities, but they're not necessarily consistent with the GP's priorities. So, the need for liquidity and DPI and real liquidity. And I say real to say that, I mean, there's a lot of liquidity that gets a bad rap, and I don't mean that, but there are places where liquidity is manufactured, and you need it to be real liquidity. So, but that's always going to be a priority of an LP, and especially right now, given the exit environment that we've had. Fees are always going to be an issue, and and the like. Alignment of interest is always going to be critical for an LP, and then sort of value creation versus financial engineering, and we talked about that in the sort of positive sum game of private markets. Um, those don't always align with GPs, but the more that GPs can stay focused on those always being a priority of LPs, I definitely think that the better. And then I guess the last one that I would share in terms of that's a really important sort of perspective and approach for a GP is candor. And you've known, since we've known each other for several years now, me, I'm always candid. But I do think that candor and even bluntness is really important. So LPs know that they're getting compensated for taking risks. So they know that those are risks. So I think it's important for, GPs, have a tendency to sort of candy coat the risks. And I don't think that's healthy. I think it's important to just call out, like, these are the risks and these are the things that could go wrong, and these are the environments within which that could go wrong. And then when something goes wrong, and let's be, again, candid and transparent, something will go wrong, own it. Like, don't try a bunch of, flowery talking points. Don't, don't place blame. Like, I just think it's really important to own it. And for me, when I was sitting in the LP chair, when someone would come to me with, these are the risks, and then later when one of those risks would blow up in our face and they came and they said, yeah, you know what? We should have zagged and we zigged and we got, we stepped on a landmine. I was always much more appreciative when someone was doing it. So that's one of the things that, again, I'm very focused on here, and even helping, you know, our organization be focused on. Just candid and transparent communication, I think, is critical.
Yeah, and I think those moments of candor and being straight up with the investor is it makes the relationship and builds trust, even if it's not a good outcome in the short term. It allows, I think, a common language and greater alignment moving forward. So I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, and by the way, that's not, I mean, it's definitely with an LPGP relationship, but, in my marriage, as a parent, I mean, I had to apologize to my kids a bunch of times, Hey, I got that one wrong. I'm sorry. I think the more that we're candid and transparent and we can just own it, the better in all relationships.
Yeah, we'll have that be the topic of the next video we do together. So
Was
we'll cover
Dan
that.
stepping on landmines as a parent? That would be perfect.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Well, Dan, I really appreciate your time and insights here. I think this is a great walkthrough of again that transition going, having sat in that LP seat, moving to a GP seat. It's always interesting to hear from those kind of former LPs in terms of how our industry can work better together. And I think that's the whole point of this conversation: is how do we get this entire stack across all different types to speak the same language and work better together. So really appreciate your time and insights, and I'm looking forward to the industry hearing this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks again for having me, Eric and Aaron, and congrats again on the TPA paper, second paper.